It's time to draft Dragon's Maze, so let's not waste any time here. We have only 1 minute for all of our picks. Returning a permanent card from the graveyard to the battlefield is somewhat clunky for limited, and Blaze Commando and Toil Trouble both don't have the impact that you want from a first pick. Spike Jester is quite a bit nicer, being a very aggressive Rakdos card. But Ubul's Gatekeepers might just be better because the format isn't as aggressive anymore, and a lot of 4 toughness creatures means that 3/1 hasters in particular aren't what you want necessarily. I like picking the Gatekeepers here because I think that they are better than Fatal Fumes, which is pretty clunky when you consider that it only gives -2 toughness for 4 mana. Let's highlight this. It's clear to see that giving a creature -2/2 is better than gaining 7 life. There is also a Rakdos Guildgate in the pack, but I think it was pretty clear that the Gatekeepers were not only the best common, but the best card for us. Here we see that there is a Steam Vents, but that's from the land slot in all the boosters, so we can deduce that our opponent, our right neighbor, took the Dragon's Maze rare, passing us Unflinching Courage among other cards. This card is basically a reprint of Armadillo Cloak, which has been very good in limited for a long time, whenever it was legal basically. Tithe Drinker is one of the strongest commons and would work well with Ubul's Gatekeepers, so a quick look at the other cards shows that there isn't really anything competing with Tithe Drinker or Unflinching Courage. Now, my personal preference is it not to go overboard with auras, although Unflinching Courage is a very good reason to do so. I'm still going to go with Tithe Drinker because I think it's one of the best commons in the set, maybe even the best, but it might have been correct to go with Unflinching Courage here. I'm still exploring the format, so trying out different things. Here we see once again that the rare is missing, but the Guildgate is there, so we have a rare and a common missing. Blast of Genius is expensive, but when you reach 6 mana, it's very, very powerful because you basically get look at 3 new cards and then still blast something. So this is a card I like to pick up early. Not first pick necessarily, but once I know that my deck can make use of it, I think it's a very high pick. I'm going to ignore the clue stones for now. There's Rakdos Guildgate, Beetleform Mage. Sunspire Gatekeepers is the second best Gatekeeper in my opinion, probably followed by the blue one. And here we have some more expensive cards that aren't bad, but I think Blast of Genius is sufficiently stronger that we should just take it here. And just going with the white Gatekeeper is too narrow of a choice for me because realistically we don't want to move into 2 colors just from the beginning, especially with the goal of drafting 3 colors. Here we have Catch Release as the rare, which isn't very exciting for limited, and I'm not sure how good it is in constructed either. Crisis Incubation is a very nice card, but it has Simic colors, so it would be completely different from what we have so far. And given that there is another Tithe Drinker, I think that should just be our pick. We are seeing a lot of Steeple Rocks, which I would like to have, but going for the cheap cards that have utility throughout the game, as does every Extort creature, has to be correct here. It's also interesting to note that there is no Guildgate or Shockland in this pack, so we see some reasons that our right neighbors are also valuing mana fixing quite highly. Picking a Guildgate instead of Tithe Drinker seems like a pretty strong signal to me that maybe to our right somebody is drafting a very colorful deck and willing to pass us the more powerful non-lands instead. This pack doesn't have anything that's too amazing. There's some Clue Stones, a Winddrake. Gleam of Battle is very expensive for what it does, and I don't like Restore the Peace at all, really. Rakdos Guildgate would be interesting because it would give us a nice way to fix our mana, and given that the power level of this pack is rather low, I'm going to take it. I like the guild gates a lot more than the clue stones, so I'm almost always going to favor them when I have the chance. The rare is Vorel of the Hulklade, which basically doubles counters on permanents. Don't think that's what we want. Rare Tear is maybe more of a constructed or more of a sideboard card. Protect and Serve is actually quite nice. I think it's, of course, it's one of the weaker split cards, but when you look at both sides and envision fusing it for limited play, it is actually a very, very nice trick that can also lead to 2-for-1s. Viashino First Blade is surprising to see this late. I think it's a pretty good card, and we could actually pick it here, but I'm drawn towards the Dimir Guild Gate. We want some Guild Gates anyway, and we have a blue card already, so the blue-black Guild Gate should be fixing our mana, and I like it better than picking up one of the 6-drops here. Let's see, this is a fused card that we also had in our first pack. It's reasonable, but it's never going to be amazing, and there are better ways to draw 2 cards in the format, and there are also better ways to burn out opponents in this format, so not the biggest fan of this kind of card, especially if you have the extort mechanic to actually drain our opponents. Showstopper is potentially very good in an aggressive deck, but this deck isn't looking like it's going to be using Showstopper to great effect. I think the pick here is between Izzet Cluestone and Maze Rusher, and I'm going to take the Cluestone, but it's possible that the Maze Rusher is just better. Here we have Nivik Cyclops, which is a nice 1/4 defender and then grows basically to a 4/4, which we don't have too many cards to trigger it yet, but it's something to consider. Now the problem is with 2 Tithe Drinkers, we already want to go into Orzhov colors, so Nivik Cyclops kind of has the wrong colors. I'm willing to splash something like a Blast of Genius for its power level, but Nivik Cyclops not so much. So I'm going to be conservative and pick a 1 colored card here. Winddrake is always going to be fine in any blue deck. This is the pack we started with. There is Izzet Cluestone, Steeple Rock, and the aforementioned Toil Trouble. And given that we have 2 Tithe Drinkers, I think that Steeple Rock should easily be the best card for us here. Yeah, I don't really see a reason not to try to get into white if at all possible. And the second rock tabling is a pretty good sign, I believe. Here we're getting the remaining clue stones that nobody wants. So black-green isn't looking to be happening. We are looking to be in Esper if at all possible. Esper being white, blue, black. And then we can still splash the Blast of Genius. So I'm going to pick Dimir Cluestone. And we have to be aware of the fact that we are going to get Orzhov cards from the left, but also Dimir cards. And our third pack is basically only going to have Azorius cards if we stick to that color combination. Here the pick is between Orzhov Cluestone and Steeple Rock, which is an interesting decision. I'm still going to go with the 5-drop because we already have 2 Cluestones, and I don't really see me playing too many of these, but I'm going to pick another one up. Here we can, well, Uncovered Clues is almost never going to do anything. Leaf Decree, not a card I'm looking to play, but who knows. Now, this deck has a couple of ways to develop now. We have, actually, even though it doesn't look like it, we have the makings of a powerful black-white deck, if we just consider the early Tithe Drinkers and the Steeple Rocks as evasive threats. And that really only works if we get some of the good extort creatures that we know from Gatecrash. So if we don't see any Orzhov cards in these packs, then we need a backup plan. And we need a backup plan fast because the extort mechanic kind of lives off the fact that you have a lot of ways to extort. Now, we do have another guild in this pack from the left, which is Dimir. So picking Call of the Nightwing or Cloudfin Raptor here would be perfectly reasonable, although I don't really like the anti-synergy between Tithe Drinker and Cloudfin Raptor, which is just somewhat awkward. I think Call of the Nightwing is great, and I don't see a reason to pick, for example, Sunhome Guildmage here, because our mana base is already pretty bad, and I think it isn't unreasonable to go for the Esper build that we considered. Here we have a Void Walk, which got sufficiently better with Dragon's Maze that you can actually consider picking it quite highly when you look at the Gatekeepers, for example. So that's just a card to keep in mind. However, there is Smite and Death's Approach, and we haven't really gotten any removal spells yet, so that would be a nice way to continue this draft. Especially with the 3/1 first strikers, but also a 4 toughness creature here, I think that Smite is going to be amazing, because we will all often be able to entice our opponents to play one of their instants or use a Blood Rush card, and then we can blow them out. Another thing to consider is that we want to draft Azorius in the third pack, in the Return to Ravnica pack, so taking out white and blue cards now gives us a little better shot at signaling to our right neighbor that we would like to get the Azorius cards from the right. We have a second Smite here as a very good option. There's a Gruul Charm, which I love, but isn't playable for us right now. Gutter Skulk, Metropolis Sprite, Undercity Plague, and Keymaster Rogue are all fine, and I would like one of the 2-drops, but I think Smite is sufficiently better. And I'm hoping that with the reduced speed of the format, we can make sure to use our Smites, and we have the evasive creatures so that Smite can target almost anything our opponents are going to throw at us. Finally, some extortion going on. Kingpin's Pad and Basilica Guards, both great. Kingpin's Pad, of course, edging out the guards by a fair margin. And Viscopa Confessor, sometimes even wheeling, but not really for consideration here. Overall, not the greatest pack. Spire Tracer, 5 Alarm Fire, in theory, should be cards that have gotten weaker with Dragon's Maze. Doesn't mean that they have become unplayable, but they took a hit with the additional toughness introduced by Dragon's Maze. We're still not really seeing a lot of guild gates, so that's something to keep in mind. Here, the most reasonable card would be Keymaster Rogue, but from our creature base, Keymaster Rogue is really awkward. It does combo somewhat with the Gatekeepers, but with the cards we have, I don't really want it in my deck, so I'm not going to pick it this early. Dracoin Crisis and Ground Assault are my favorite cards out of this pack, but it's very unlikely that we are going to be able to play them. However, Horror of the Dim or Klingent Anemones aren't really on the same power level, so I'm just going to take the Ground Assault. Even if we don't play it, then at least we don't have to face it. This pack has some nice options with Sapphire Drake, Metropolis Sprite, and Dimir Guildgate being the contenders. Now, Sapphire Drake is fine, but it doesn't have any synergy with our deck, and I'm not looking to make my deck more expensive currently. So I think that Dimir Guildgate is actually the best card for us here, given that Metropolis Sprite and Tithe Drinker do put quite a strain on our mana base. I would like to have the Guildgate just to be sure that we aren't going to be color screwed in our games. This pack has Dimir Keyrune and not much else, and the Keyrune should be better than a Clue Stone most of the time, given that you get a 2/2 unblockable out of the deal. And we are going to be forced to play some of these, hopefully not too many. So I think this is a pretty clear pick. Now this is interesting. Dimir Guildgate number 3, competing for Dimir Charm, which is a very nice instant removal spell in my opinion, even though looking at your opponent's library isn't usually what you want to be doing in Limited. It's sufficiently better than Dimir Guildgate that we have to pick it here. And we also have another pack waiting for us to fix our mana. A late Drakering Crisis competes for Dutiful Thrall and Last Thoughts, and this deck could really use a Dutiful Thrall as a way to just hold off the ground indefinitely, and it also synergizes nicely with our evasive creatures and the smites. So I'm going to pick the Thrall here. This pack has the Void Walk, and there's also Nav Squad Commandos, but we don't need the Commandos because we have triple Steeple Rock, so just picking up the Void Walk here doesn't hurt us at all, and we might make some use out of it. We aren't going to play any of these cards. Verdant Haven is potentially the strongest one, but I don't want to play against Alpha Authority. Gridlock could be nice. I'm not going to take Spiral Tracer or Adaptive Snapjaw, and Gridlock, even if it's only a sideboard card, could do some work for us. Okay, can hide some of these cards now. Ground Assault, most likely not going to make it. Leer of Decree doesn't look like a card that we want to play in our decks. So if we hide the worst cards, then we see that we aren't remotely where we want to be yet. And we also only have 3 guild gates for our gatekeepers. So yeah, this deck still needs some work. And also we didn't really get the Extort chain to work. We only have 3 Extort creatures, which isn't a lot. We did open Jace, Architect of Thought, and given that our deck is quite controlling, Jace looks like a very good fit. It pains me to pass a Soulstone Spirit, but it has to be correct to pick the Planeswalker here. We probably won't wheel the Spirit though, we have to be realistic about that. On the other hand, both of these all 3 of these 4-drops are very fine. Hussar Patrol, probably a card that people are going to play around less now that it's drafted in 3 sets. And Slum Reaper always being reasonable, although not really the card that this deck wants. Okay, Jace it is. Whoa, the good cards continue. If you remember Skymark Rock from Return to Ravnica, it's a very, very scary uncommon, and we do have a lot of space here in our 4 mana slot. Hypersonic Dragon also quite powerful, and looking at Vassal Soul, Launch Party, Daggerdrum Imp, Azorius Arrestor, and Isperia Skywatch, this pack has a lot to offer for our color combination, and then also some good red cards. We are potentially splashing Blast of Genius, so picking the Hypersonic Dragon wouldn't be out of the question, but we only have a Rakdos Guildgate and an Izzet Cluestone, so it's much more likely that we are going to be able to cast the Skymark Rock, and it's comparable in power level to Hypersonic Dragon. Yeah, there are going to be games where it's sufficiently better than Hypersonic Dragon, in fact. Here we have a pretty easy pick in Arrest. It's going to be rounding up our removal suit. Rootborn Defense is a card I like, but probably not the right card for this deck. And Doorkeeper, a card I would probably play given that we don't have a lot of 2-drops, and it gives us a nice ground blocker that can potentially act as a win condition, but Arrest has to be the clear pick here. It's only the question of what we can expect to table out of this pack. Here we see Rest in Peace, which isn't as good in Limited as it is in Constructed. Although I've boarded it in sometimes because it's just pretty good against some of the Scavenge decks or other graveyard dependent cards, of which there are some. Seller of Songbird, Sewer Shambler, Hover Barrier, Nuprav, Guildmage, Fencing Ace, all very reasonable cards. I like Hover Barrier because it just stops everything, but Nuprav Guildmage gives us a great way to use our mana, although it's kind of tough on the colored mana base as well. I also don't see that much that we can do with its ability. Our most important creatures have flying already, and Detaining is something that's better off used in an aggressive deck. I'm not sure about this pick because there are so many options, but I'm going to go with Hover Barrier here because I have the hope that it just acts as a great removal spell for us. Next up, Teleportal, probably the best card in this pack. It's an incredible finisher, and it has only gotten better now that the format is a little slower. We could pick up an Izzet Guildgate, which would guarantee that we can splash the Blast of Genius. And the alternatives are basically Keening Apparition and Isperia Skywatch. I'm not going to pick Teleportal because it doesn't fit into the strategy well, our deck isn't aggressive enough to support Teleportal. Putting Smite and Teleportal in the same deck is usually a sign of something going wrong. We also have a lot of defending creatures here. So I like the Skywatch, but we have three power flyers already, and Keening Apparition is fine, but it's not a guild gate, and I really want my gatekeepers to do some work and my mana base to be as good as possible, so I'm going to go with Izzet Guildgate here. Next up, I was looking at Electromancer and Counterflux, but we aren't really red. We are only splashing the Blast of Genius, so that's not really an option, but there's a Doorkeeper and a Seller of Songbirds as the reasonable options, with Crosstown Courier being a distant third in my opinion. And I would think that Doorkeeper is going to do more for this deck than the Seller, because we already do a good job with against low toughness creatures, but larger creatures like 3-4 creatures is another topic altogether. So I would like to have the high toughness defender here. That's also going to act as a potential win condition. Here we have Psychic Spiral, so if we want to go all in on the milling, we can definitely try something like that, but I don't think that's happening. Golgari Guildgate is fine, but we only have one gatekeeper and we aren't playing green, so there is no reason to go for the Guildgate here. I think that Rune Ring is probably the best pick, followed by Dispel, but I do know that in Return to Ravnica, Dispel countered a lot of the good removal spells, so it might actually be better than Rune Ring, but we are going to be the ones trying to play the removal spells, and it's less likely that we want to protect something from Dispel or need it desperately to ensure our creatures live. We don't have a single creature that we are overly attached to, so I'm fine with passing the situational counter spells for something that we can use better. Here we have Doorkeeper, Paralyzing Grasp, and Zenicav Locust. And all of these are fine cards, the Locust being the most powerful, which should be pretty obvious. But there's a case to be made for Doorkeeper as another early defender. I'm going to go with the Locust, though it just seems so much more powerful that I would love to have it in my deck. The House of Patrol tabled, so that's clearly the card for us, and I expect it to be quite good here. This pack has a Vessel Soul, which is okay, and another Izzet Guildgate, which we could take. That would mean that we have 3 red sources, even without playing Izzet Cluestone, which is a lot if we only want to play Blast of Genius, but it's also going to make the Gatekeepers just a little bit better, and I don't think that we have a problem with playables, so Vessel Soul, while being fine, is just worse than our other 3 drops, and I like to have the mana fixing available. Here it seems like the point in time where we do pick up a Dispel. Fireman's Foresight doesn't really do anything in our deck. We could get a Smite and a Dimir Charm, but don't think that's worth paying 7 mana for. Whoa, another interesting decision to make here. Fencing Ace is actually a very reasonable 2-drop, even if you are a defensive deck, and I don't really like Cancel all that much. Swift Just is not the right deck. I'm going to pick the creature. It's possible that the defensive nature of our deck means that we want at least one counterspell in there, but we have quite a lot of removal spells, and our creature base isn't bad either, so I'm not really unhappy about passing a Cancel. Could pick up a Counterflux, which we could splash when boarding in. I think it's better than Mind Rot, because Mind Rot just too often doesn't really hit what you want to be hitting. Okay, I think we did quite fine for our first Magic Online Dragon's Maze draft. but let's see how the deck ends up looking. Going to put the cards I'm not really sure about to the right, and then it's possible that we are just going to easily have enough playables, especially depending on how many clue stones we are willing to play. That's of course somewhat of an important question, but we can already see that we have 22 cards down there. So let me put that to the right a little bit, make it a little easier to look at. Okay. So we do have 15 creatures, which is a pretty high number given that our deck is quite controlling. Our mana curve is a little higher than I would like, but it's not awful either, especially given that it is a curve, despite the fact that we have quite a lot of 4-drops. Now, I think the most reasonable thing to do would probably just be to play one of the 3 mana artifacts and then go with 17 lands, giving us basically 18 mana sources, but the additional advantage of either drawing a card with one of the clue stones or attacking for 2 with an unblockable Dimir Key Rune. It also could potentially accelerate into one of the more expensive cards, and something that's also not completely irrelevant is dropping the Key Rune and or clue stone and then following it up with a 4-drop and a guild gate, which could be especially important with the gatekeepers. The fact that we have 2 smites and a dutiful thrall could mean that it's good to play Azorius Clue Stone as a way to not only fix our mana, but to use it the turn we play the Clue Stone. Judging from the effect alone, I think that Dimir Key Rune is superior to the clue stones in general, and that's going to be the case more often than not. Now we have Dispel, Voidwalk, Gridlock, and Fencing Ace in our sideboard, and all of these cards look like they are best suited to be in the sideboard. Gridlock isn't the card that we need in the main deck. Voidwalk would be in our main deck if we had more than one card to abuse it with, but we are going to bring it in if we see that our opponents are playing a lot of auras. Fencing Ace we only need if its defensive capabilities are needed, and Dispel of course depends heavily on the opponent's deck. If you look at this deck, we are only playing 2 smites, so main decking a Dispel against we have a Dimir Charm, but even against a very removal heavy deck like this, it doesn't really counter our best cards at all. So I think we are fine with this setup. Now, I'm not going to play Izzet Cluestone because we have 3 red sources in our lands, and it's going to be the Cluestone that fixes our mana the worst. Looking at the distribution here, and we can click on the stats tab as well, we should be okay. We can see the colored mana symbols, so white and blue are pretty even. Black is a little less, and then we have only a single red card. So getting 1 black is going to be important, and at some point we do want double blue for the Jays. On the other hand, extorting we are never going to be able to extort with blue mana, so that's something to keep in mind. We don't want to draw too many blue sources either. Now, for the purpose of our mana base, the Rakdos Guildgate and the Izzet Guildgate aren't really dual lands, and Dimir Guildgates are dual lands for blue-black, so we actually have not a single white source in this pile yet. We do know that we are going to play 1 Clue Stone, and now we can do a nice trick. Let's just assume it's the Key Rune. It doesn't really matter for this calculation. We do know that we are going to have these 6 dual mana sources and then an additional 12 mana sources. That means that the overall number of colored mana that we can produce is going to be 6 times 2 plus 12, which is 2 times 12 or 24. So we can distribute the 24 mana sources among colors as we wish. However, we know that 3 of those are going to be red no matter what. So it's basically 21 sources distributed among the remaining 3 colors. And that, for example, could mean that we want a 7-7-7 split, but that would give black a little bit too much credit because we actually don't have too many black cards. Now, if we deviate from the 7-7-7, one way to go would just be play an additional blue land and drop a swamp in the process. So even though we have more white mana sources on our cards, it could be better to play an additional blue because of Jace. On the other hand, there is 2 Tithe Drinkers, so that's something to consider. If we only have 2 different colors of mana in our opening hand, we actually don't want them to be blue more often than not. Now, the last thing that I consider when building a mana base is that these lands are actually a little worse than they look. So black and blue are already kind of disadvantaged because their mana sources in the respective colors are going to be coming into play tapped more often. So giving white 7 sources, a full 7 sources, is going to be doubly positive for white. It gets a lot of sources and gets all of them untapped. So with that said, I'm going to order this somehow. So we have the black here, the blue here, and then we are going to be adding the white over there. Now we want up to 7 planes, we already know that. So we can move this here. And just to make it a little easier for you, I'm going to, and for me as well, going to add a couple of islands so that we can see how this actually develops. Now, this would already be 7 blue sources without the key rune, and this would be 7 blue sources with Dimir key rune. And that would only leave 3 black sources, but of course it's going to add up to 7 as well. 4, 5, 6, 7, because that's what we computed. Now, I kind of like going for 7-7-7 here, because one thing is that the key rune actually gives us more ways to use blue and black mana as well. And the Tithe Drinkers and Kingpin's Pet means that additional blue mana isn't really what we want, but we can always make good use of additional white and black mana. So I don't really have the time to calculate this to its fullest extent, but I have a good feeling playing this mana base. Even though it's kind of heavy on the white mana, it gives us the best shot at having at least 1 source of each color, and that's kind of the most important thing if you want to not just lose games in this limited format because you can't cast your spells. So we are still going to have a hard time casting Tithe Drinker, but at least we are playing 7 black and 7 white sources to maximize the chances. We're also playing Dimir key rune in the colors that are actually a bit overrepresented, so that kind of compensates for that. Dimir key rune is just not going to make the mana on turn 2 or on turn 3 realistically. Okay, I hope that wasn't too complicated, and like I said, I'm not really sure about this mana base. It's just complicated, especially because our guild gates don't make any white mana. We have to play a lot of planes to compensate for that, but I think it should be a reasonable mana base to win some games with this deck. Let's see how it goes.